Hi, welcome back to Energy Works. I'm Blaine Wilkes. I'm the co host of this podcast with Lauren Walker, who is here with me today. If you listened to our first podcast, this is our second. So, welcome. If you listened to the first, we did the theme of that first episode on grounding. So, if you haven't listened to that one, maybe back up or just sometime in the next few days while this is fresh on your mind, the content we'll talk about today, go back and listen to the grounding one. And the theme of today's podcast is creativity. And you learned in the first podcast that grounding is just incredibly foundational to you as a healthy, energetic being. If you're not grounded, you don't have appropriately placed roots, it's hard to rise up and grow and move forward in your life. Everything is just unbalanced and unstable unless you are grounded. So, on the foundation of grounding, we're going to talk about creativity. And we all are creative beings. And I can tell you from my personal journey, it has taken me years to be able to know what that means and acknowledge that. And so I was in the place of thinking, I am not creative. I am more of a corporate person until the last, within 10 years of my life. I was very methodical. I still am. I worked for big four accounting firms for 15 years. And if you would say, Blaine, are you creative? I would say, no, I am not creative at all. I don't do art. I don't paint. I don't sing. I don't do any of those things. I am not at all creative. I'm not a creative person. That's not who I am. Other people are creative. I am not. And I really firmly believe that. I know better now because what I know now that I didn't know then is you are always creating. I am always creating intentionally or unintentionally. So every action I make is a little creation. It can be a productive creation, it can be a destructive creation, but every little thing I do is creating something. So I'll start there. And Lauren, please hop in and share with us your thoughts on creativity.
I love that you really came full circle to understanding your creative potential, which is understanding each of our individual creative potentials, because that is what we're doing. And it might seem strange. Okay, we started with grounding. Why is creativity the next thing we're talking about when we're talking about energy? But you really and so we wanna start to do that with more intentionality, and we want to allow each of you to understand what that means and how we can get into what we call a flow state. You've probably heard that in terms of athletes or artists, but we all have the capacity to get into that flow state where we have access to our creative impulses, and we also have access to the means for bringing them into being, into fruition. And so we are going to take this journey today to understand a little bit more energetically how creativity works. And just like we talked about in grounding, you can be too grounded, which brings immobility in, or not grounded enough, which brings the inability to get anything done. So those oppositional forces are at play. We have the same thing at play in creativity. We can be feel like we're just stuck. We don't have any idea of what to do, how to move forward, what's the next thing, and that would be not being in the flow state. We can be maybe this isn't the right languaging to say too creative, but we can be uncontainered in our creativity and kind of go into a bit of a mania with our overcreation. And if you think about the movie A Beautiful Mind, you get an idea of that over creativity where he didn't have any grounding and he wasn't boundaried in his creativity. And so, therefore, none of that creativity was channeled into something that was useful. And so it's really important to understand energetically that your creativity is also a product of the energy that runs everything in your life. And so we're going to talk today about creativity and the importance of having your energy on board. So, and I'm not talking about I have enough energy today to get through my day, like I'm really awake or I'm really tired. I'm not talking about that kind of energy. I'm talking about the energy of creativity, how to access it to get into the flow state.
Yes, we'll share with you at the end of this episode the actual energetic technique that we do to help us be more creative. It is a science-based technique, and we want to never have you leave an episode with us just kind of talking about what we do or what we think without giving you something to practice in your own energy field, because that's the power of learning about your own energy, is really feeling it in your body, not just understanding energy intellectually, but tuning in and feeling the vibration and the changing and the shifting and the humming and the swirling and everything that's happening in your energy body all the time. That is why you are alive, right? Prana, we call it in yoga, or chi in Chinese medicine, your life force energy and the direction of that life force energy so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. And to build on what Lauren said, I think about this now that I can call myself a creative being. And sometimes I feel over creative, that unbounded creativity, or if I think about where I'm directing my energy, am I just generating creative ideas or am I doing anything with these ideas? It's one thing to have all these great ideas. It's another thing to move it from the creative idea state to the get something done state. And so now my problem, I can say, is almost reverse how I used to think I wasn't creative at all, and I really just lived my life by a series of codes and rules that I adhered to. Now that I really see myself as a creative being, and I'm so full of creative potential, it's the container. So, if you have water, and then you need a glass to hold that water in, because what's happening to that water with no glass? I like to think about using this discussion around water, an apple seed. An apple seed is this tiny, tiny little thing, but how much potential is in that tiny little seed? Well, what can it grow into? How many more apples with their own little seeds can come out of that one little seed? It is infinite. And so there's this overwhelming power in our creative being. And so the container and the harnessing of that, because we're human beings, we are not apple seeds, into taking that in, and I'll just even use the word manifesting, or creating the life that I want to live.
I love that you use the apple seed metaphor because it really fits in with what we're talking about. You take that apple seed and you put it in the ground. You ground that apple seed and then you water it. You pour water on the apple seed so that it can come into a flow state. It can move from its grounded place and start to create. And it will become a tree. And that tree has endless different iterations of what it could look like and how big it's going to be and how, is it in the sun or is it in the shade and how many limbs is it going to have and all the apples. And so it's like all of that is exactly what we're talking about. First take that grounding and then we bring in this idea of flow state so that we can flow out our creative endeavors. And we are always creating. I'm really glad that you said that earlier on. We are always creating. And if we bring intentionality to it, we can create in a way that is abundant, that feels good, that is satisfying, that is nourishing, that is co-creative, which we'll talk about in another episode. But if we don't bring our consciousness to it and we don't have the grounding that is going to lead us onto this path, then our creation can also be destructive. We are creating all the time. Either it's beneficial or it's destructive or it's somewhere on the in the spectrum in between. But that is the whole spectrum of our creative possibilities, and you can just look at the history of the world to see how much creative destruction there is. And so it's really important, and we're going to get to in future episodes how we infuse our journey and our pathways with self-love, self-regard, regard for the communities that we flow through and in, as well as the world at large. But that needs to start first in ourselves, to have that awakening acknowledgement of our creative powers, and then to start to tap into those within this container that we're talking about, that we're going to share with you at the end of the episode today. And I think a couple of things that I want to add to this is the things that hold us back, the things that keep us from our creative potential. And Blaine, you shared a couple right there. You didn't even think you were creative. You were just rule following and doing your job that you were told to do. And this is what, and you thought creativity is only singing or dancing or playing an instrument or something. And it's not me. But the fact is, it is you. And maybe you had other fears around expressing your creative potential, because if you were working within a paradigm that said, well, this is how you make money and this is how you do your job, there you don't have the creativity within that. It's A, B, C, D, and that's it. Then you might have fears around bringing your creative potential to even your working situation. Well, maybe that's not going to be received well. Maybe nobody's going to, listen to my ideas, or maybe I'll lose my job if I start to, bring these ideas up, and then I'm not going to be making money anymore. And so then I'm going off in a different tangent instead of the tangent of how can I be creative in every aspect of my life intentionally, with love and with commitment to my own journey.
Yeah. How can I be creative within the container? Because I didn't allow myself, I love how you said that. I definitely didn't allow myself to reach my creative potential within the container that I was in. I wasn't going to rewrite the rules of accounting. That's just, not going to be done. But I certainly had problems. I was managing teams. I had to deal with clients. There are financial issues all over the place in these businesses. And so there was definitely creativity that I would have to use in problem solving. I just at that time wouldn't have necessarily called it creativity. I probably would have called it problem solving. Like I was good at solving problems. But we all have it, because even in that container I was in, even though I wouldn't have labeled it as that, I definitely was using my creativity, even if I wasn't nurturing it. And I think that each of us, if we can come to the realization that we are creating all the time, and maybe it's like a paradigm shift. I mean, it was a paradigm shift for me to be able to call myself a creative person. And now I think anyone who looked at my life today would say I was a creative person. And I even have a real life example from the old world when I was still in corporate, when literally at some point something like this came up and I said I wasn't creative. And a friend of mine said, Blaine, yes, you are. You cook all the time. You make recipes. I was a recipe tester for vegan cookbooks at the time. I was very more new in vegan world. And at that time, I mean, now there's a ton of vegan cookbooks and podcasts and YouTube channels and influencers. I mean, there's a whole vegan world. Back when I became vegan, none of that existed. I was very much on my own trying to figure it out. And so I was a little creative maniac in the kitchen. And so a friend of mine called me out once when I said that I wasn't creative. And so bringing it back into the energy and the balance and the creative potential, I think is the mindfulness that even when I'm not in the kitchen, or I'm not writing a newsletter, or I'm not creating a new course, or Lauren and I just created this podcast. we just went through this whole creative process to be sitting here on microphones in front of cameras to talk to you today, even when it's not that overtly creative. When I open my eyes in the morning and swing my feet out of bed and put them on the ground and start moving through the world, I'm creating things. And there are ripples to every single one of my actions. And so, how can I make sure that my energy is in balance and harmonized and flowing and I'm intentional so I'm not unintentionally creating things that are harming either myself or others?
Oh my gosh, there are so many things that you just said that I want to comment on. And so the first one is I want to go back to that corporate and that structure that you felt that you didn't have any creativity within. But I will say this, and you know this, but our listeners might not. We get often called to come into corporate environments to help teams, just like Blaine was on, to be more efficient, more effective, more relational, better problem solvers. All of those are very creative acts, and all of those can be supported and expanded and brought into balance by doing the very energy works and techniques that we are showing you on this very podcast. So, the things that we are talking about are actually the things that will spark and open up creativity, even within areas that you think might not be creative. You know, if you've got a team that you're working with and you're really struggling with the problem and it's not, you're not coming up with a solution, you could creatively say, hey, let's go outside for a walk and see what we can do. Or let's take a break and order lunch and just eat together and just have conversations about nothing to do with work and see if something then drops in. The reason that corporates go on retreats all the time is to kind of break out of the same thing, doing the same thing every day, every day, every day, and allowing you to open up to new ideas, new directions, to open up to your creative powers. Because, like you said, Blaine, everything that you're doing is an act of creation. And I also love the being creative in the kitchen. Because again, we've got this idealized view of, actors and performers and musicians, and they're the creative ones. But we are all so creative in our lives. If you build a garden, or if you cook in your kitchen, or you're a knitter, anything that you're doing, you are creating. Even if maybe you're not a cook, but one time you want to make a birthday cake for your best friend. So you're going to get the supplies together and you're going to make the decorations on it. And you're going to, let's see, I'm going to put some rose petals on top. And then I'm going to like make her name and out of like little pieces of cookie or little pieces of nuts on the top. Like that is a creative act and it brings all of you to the process and it's so joyful. And so I think that's a piece when you're talking about getting out of bed in the morning and how you're walking through your life. If you're walking through consciously, creatively joyful, that is the ripple of energy that you are sending off into the world around you, that you are creating little waves of as you walk by. It's like if you walk by someone on the street and you smile, chances are they're going to smile back. That is a transmission of energy. And that happens very overtly, like with a smile, or conversely with a scowl. And it happens with just how you are feeling and being as you walk through the world. You are creating energy every step of your day. So I really love that you brought that up as well.
So, Lauren, do you want to talk about how we can bring our creativity into balance so that we can be in flow state, but also in container at the same time in an appropriate proportion for what it is we're trying to create in any given moment?
Absolutely. So this goes right into some neuroscience, which is so cool. So a lot of you know this information. For some of you, maybe it's new, but we've got two hemispheres of the brain. We've got the right hemisphere of the brain, which operates the left side of the body, and we have the left hemisphere of the brain, which operates the right side of the body. Now, some of this will be reversed if your dominant hand is left-handed. I think there's about 10% of the population that is left-hand dominant. Right-hand dominant is the predominance of the population. And so how it works is the both sides of the brain have their own unique attributes, the things that they are responsible for. And let me see if I've got to like close my eyes and think about this for a minute. So if I am right hand dominant, that's my left brain dominant. It's the right side of the brain that is the more creative, that sees the world as a whole, that sees the world in pictures and sounds and symbols. And it is the left side of the brain that operates the right side of the body that is more linear and more action oriented, that sees the world in steps, A, B, C, D, and this is how I do something. In order for you to bring your creativity out into the world, both of those sides of the brain need to be communicating to each other richly, deeply, and constantly. And you might think, well, that's just how the brain works. Of course, the brain works. But that isn't always the case. The brain can get compartmentalized and just start to fixate on one side or the other. And what happens then is your body is not cohesive. You're not thinking creatively and acting intentionally. You're only on one side or the other. And that leads to all kinds of issues: learning disabilities, inability for the body to heal. All of these things come from from the brain not communicating across what's called the corpus callosum, that little piece in the center that connects the brain, the sides of the brain to each other. So we have a technique that is about crossing the energies of the brain from one side to the other. But as everything energetically is, as above, so below. So it's not only the brain hemispheres speaking to each other, but that idea of that pattern of crossing energy from one side of the body to the other happens throughout the whole body. And then it also happens individually in individual organs and individual cells, which are a microcosm of how the brain and the body works as a whole. Energy always needs to be doing this crossover back and forth pattern, exchanging information back and forth in order for you to be optimally working. So there's the description of what. And then, Blaine, why don't you lead us through the practice of how?
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. That was a great description. And I'm really glad that was you, not me, who just did that whole talk about the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So, one of our primary energy patterns, optimal patterns, so we want this to be running optimally, is crossing over for the reasons that Lauren just talked about. So we can use our right hand and our left hand to cross the midline of the body. And we start to develop this pattern of crossover as a baby. So when babies start to crawl, when they move to crawling, and you can picture a cute baby on their hands and knees figuring out how to crawl, and they're kind of, it's like this waddle, this the right leg and the left leg and the right hand and the left hand, they're not moving like a linear robot, right? There's this kind of like side to side, to cross. And so as infants, as babies, that is where we start to establish this really important crossover pattern in our body. And babies who skip that, who don't learn to crawl and start to just pull up and start to walk, that's a sign for people who work in early childhood development that that child needs a little extra support. Because if they skip that, just establishing this all important crossover pattern, they're going to have other problems going forward. And so now we're adults, we're not little babies anymore. We've created some of our own little patterns in our life. And I'm sure that I've been quite compartmentalized, as Lauren was talking about, in different stages in my life. I'm not anymore, because I do this practice. We are literally going to cross our body right to left to right to left to right. And you can be standing or sitting, and we're just going to use our hands and our thighs. You can just take your hands and kind of just like almost like you're just wash your hands and you're just flicking off a little bit of water. I'm doing this. If you can see me, if you're a listener on a podcast, I'm just kind of like shaking and brushing off my hands. And I'm going to take my right hand and tap my left thigh and my left hand and tap my right thigh. And I'm just going to do that a bunch of times. And you can actually do shoulder, right? If you're like, I don't know, I can't, if I'm laying in bed, it's hard to reach my thigh. You can do right hand, left shoulder, left hand, right shoulder. And I'm just going back and forth. And if you want to add some breath work to this is where it gets kind of like tap the head, rub the belly sort of thing. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. And we'll have a whole episode on breath work in the future, but we're just being very intentional. We're breathing in an intentional way, and we're crossing our body in an intentional way, and we're using our energy that is within us to bring us into this crossover pattern so we can optimize our ability to be creative to its fullest potential. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that?
I love that. I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect. If you could see it and you followed us, that's great. And if you were listening, then you got a good idea of just bringing your hand across the body. This is really one of, again, these foundational techniques that is going to help you so much. And it seems so simple, and yet it really is a powerful transformative practice to start to get your creativity flowing. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode and that you feel creatively inspired. Go do something creative right now and go enjoy the rest of your day, and tune in to our next episode where we take this discussion even further. If you like this, subscribe to our podcast and find out how energy works can work for you.